Imagine a letter sealed with wax pressed by a king's own ring, hidden for centuries, its contents so explosive it could have rewritten the fate of nations. Now picture this, a servant nervously slipping that same letter into the flames, ensuring its secrets died with the royal family's darkest hour. This isn't fiction. It happened, and it's just one of countless moments where whispers behind palace walls changed the course of history. From forbidden love affairs that sparked wars to clandestine treaties signed in shadowed corridors, royal secrets didn't just ripple through courts, they shattered thrones, toppled empires, and left entire kingdoms trembling in their wake. For centuries, the world's most powerful rulers played a dangerous game of deception, where a single slip of the tongue could mean ruin. Behind the glitter of crowns and the grandeur of castles, truth was often the rarest commodity. What if I told you that some of history's most pivotal moments, battles won, alliances broken, dynasties erased, were decided not on the battlefield, but in hushed conversations between trusted confidants? These weren't just secrets, they were weapons, and today we're pulling back the velvet curtains to reveal 25 of the most jaw-dropping, game-changing royal cover-ups ever recorded. Think you know the stories behind history's most famous monarchs? Think again, because what's written in the history books is often just the polished version, the tale spun to keep the masses in line. But the real drama, that's buried in coded diaries, burned documents, and the silent vows of those who took the truth to their graves. From the Tudor court's lethal romances to the Romanovs' doomed prophecies, we're diving deep into the shadows where power and secrecy collided. So settle in, this isn't just a journey through time, it's an unraveling of the lies that built and broke the world's most legendary kingdoms. And trust me, by the end, you'll never look at a crown the same way again. The French Revolution was a whirlwind of blood, betrayal, and broken crowns, but none of its mysteries cut deeper than the fate of little Louis XVII. Officially, the boy died alone in a squalid prison cell at just 10 years old, his tiny body ravaged by neglect. But what if the truth was far darker? What if the lost heir didn't die that night in 1795, but vanished instead, stolen away by royalists desperate to keep the Bourbon line alive? For over 2 centuries, this question haunted historians, spawning pretenders, secret societies, and even a gruesome exhumation. The story begins with the storming of the Tuileries Palace. As Paris burned with revolution, the young Dauphin, once destined to rule France, was torn from his family and thrown into the Temple prison. His parents, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, met the guillotine, but their son became a pawn in a deadly political game. Guards tormented him, forcing him to denounce his own mother. Then, silence. The government announced his death, but rumors spread like wildfire. The body buried in an unmarked grave wasn't his. Decades later, a man named Karl Wilhelm Naundorf stepped forward, claiming to be the escaped prince. His knowledge of Versailles' secret passages and royal rituals stunned courts across Europe. Skeptics dismissed him, but others whispered, what if? In 2000, scientists finally tested the heart preserved as Louis's relic. The DNA matched Marie Antoinette's hair, yet some still refused to believe. Because here's the chilling part. If the boy king survived, it means France's revolutionaries knowingly let an innocent child rot in the dark, or worse, staged his death to crush royalist hope forever. Either way, the lost heir's shadow still lingers over France, a ghost in the gilded halls of Versailles. Anne Boleyn's rise and fall was a masterclass in how quickly royal favor could turn to fatal fury. One moment, she was Henry VIII's greatest obsession, the woman he tore England from the Catholic Church to marry. The next, she stood accused of adultery with 5 men, including her own brother. The charges were grotesque, the trial a spectacle, and the execution swift. But centuries later, historians still debate, were these accusations truth or a meticulously crafted lie to remove a queen who'd outlived her usefulness? The evidence against Anne was flimsy at best. Court musician Mark Smeaton allegedly confessed under torture, while Henry's close friend Henry Norris refused to admit guilt even as the noose tightened. Most damningly, George Boleyn, Anne's brother, was charged with incest, a claim so outrageous even Tudor society gasped. The trials were rushed, the verdicts predetermined. And at the center of it all stood Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, whose rivalry with Anne over religious reforms and foreign policy had reached a boiling point. Was Cromwell the architect of her downfall? Court records suggest he personally gathered witnesses and supervised their interrogations, twisting hearsay into treason. Then there's the chilling detail of the execution itself. Henry, usually a stickler for protocol, broke tradition in two shocking ways. First, he imported a French swordsman instead of using an English axeman, a bizarre act of mercy for a woman he claimed had betrayed him repeatedly. Second, he scheduled Anne's death before her alleged lover's executions, ensuring no last-minute reprieve could expose flaws in the case. As the blade fell on Tower Green, one thing became clear: this wasn't justice. It was erasure. Modern forensic analysis of Cromwell's letters reveals telltale gaps, phrases scrubbed, dates altered. Even the Spanish ambassador, no friend to Anne, wrote that the charges were invented. Perhaps the most damning clue: just 11 days after Anne's death, Henry married Jane Seymour. Coincidence or proof that the king had already moved on before the ink dried on the execution order? The real scandal wasn't adultery. It was how easily a queen could be unmade by whispers in the right ears. And in Henry's England, those ears belonged to a king who'd rather shed blood than admit he'd made a mistake. Two small skeletons found beneath a staircase in the Tower of London in 1674 sparked a mystery that's haunted England for over 500 years. The bones belonged to children, likely boys around 12 and 10 years old. For centuries, they were believed to be the tragic remains of Edward V and his younger brother Richard, the infamous princes in the Tower. Their disappearance in 1483 became the ultimate cold case, wrapping medieval power struggles in layers of Tudor propaganda, Shakespearean drama, and modern forensic debate. The story begins with a kingdom in chaos. When Edward IV died suddenly, his 12-year-old son was next in line, but the boy's uncle, Richard the Duke of Gloucester, had other plans. Declaring the princes illegitimate due to a dubious claim their parents' marriage was invalid, Richard seized the throne as Richard III. The boys were last seen playing in the tower's garden before vanishing forever. Official records fell suspiciously silent. By summer's end, whispers of murder spread like poison through the court. Enter William Shakespeare, whose play, Richard III, painted the king as a scheming hunchback who ordered the boys smothered in their sleep. For centuries, this version stuck, but here's the twist. Shakespeare wrote under Queen Elizabeth I, granddaughter of Henry VII, the man who defeated Richard at Bosworth Field. Tudor rulers had every reason to villainize Richard to justify their own shaky claim to the throne. Modern historians now question the narrative. Why would Richard, having already secured the crown, risk scandal by killing his nephews when keeping them imprisoned would suffice? The discovery of the skeletons seemed to confirm the worst until 20th century science raised doubts. Radiocarbon dating placed the bones between 1450 and 1550, fitting the prince's timeline. But analysis also revealed something strange. The older child showed signs of chronic jaw disease, while contemporary accounts described Edward as healthy. Could these be different children entirely? Without DNA evidence, the bones were reburied in Westminster Abbey and remain untested. The truth stays locked in history's shadows. Perhaps the most damning clue isn't what we've found, but what's missing. No recorded searches, no outcry from the boy's mother, who later reconciled with Richard. No smoking gun, just a chilling silence. Whether Richard orchestrated their deaths or others took advantage of the chaos may never be known. But one thing's certain: their story became the perfect weapon. turning a king into a monster and a tragedy into propaganda that still shapes how we see the past. The princes didn't just vanish, they became ghosts, forever trapped between history's pages and the politics that rewrote them. Catherine the Great didn't just inherit an empire, she seized it in one of history's most audacious power grabs, orchestrated not with armies but with whispers, forged letters, and the loyalty of men her husband had foolishly ignored. Picture this: St. Petersburg, 1762. Peter III, a ruler more obsessed with playing soldier than governing, had just signed a humiliating peace treaty with Prussia, alienating Russia's military elite. Meanwhile, his estranged wife Catherine, a foreign-born German princess, had spent years cultivating relationships with the very guards and nobles Peter dismissed as beneath him. The stage was set for a coup so swift it left Europe gasping. The spark came in June when Peter publicly threatened to divorce Catherine and imprison her in a convent, a fatal miscalculation. That night, as Peter vacationed at his summer palace, Catherine rode to the barracks of the Izmailovsky regiment. Dressed in a guard's uniform, she delivered a fiery speech accusing Peter of betraying Russia's interests. The soldiers, already furious over pay cuts and Peter's idolization of Prussia, swore allegiance to her on the spot. By dawn, every major regiment in the capital had followed suit, and the Senate declared Catherine sole ruler. Peter, hearing the news, reportedly burst into tears, begging for mercy. But here's where the mystery thickens. Officially, Peter died just 8 days later from hemorrhoidal colic, a dubious diagnosis that had skeptics whispering poison. Others claimed he was strangled by Catherine's lover, Alexei Orlov, in a drunken brawl. The truth we'll never know. Catherine ensured Peter's death certificate vanished, and Orlov's later confession letter, filled with suspicious details, may well have been a forgery to scapegoat him. What's undeniable is the timing. Peter's demise cleared the path for Catherine's 34-year reign, transforming Russia into a global power. The brilliance of Catherine's coup wasn't just its execution, it was the propaganda that followed. She framed herself as Russia's savior from Peter's incompetence, commissioning portraits of her as Minerva, goddess of wisdom. Yet beneath the gilded image lay a ruthless truth. In the Game of Thrones, Catherine understood something her husband never did. It wasn't the crown that made power, it was the people who believed you deserved to wear it. And with a mix of charisma, cunning, and well-placed allies, she convinced an empire to hand her the throne without firing a single shot. The greatest testament to her skill, history remembers her as the Great, while Peter's legacy crumbles into footnotes about the man who lost everything in less than a month. The night of July 16, 1918, should have been the end of the Romanov dynasty, but what followed was a web of lies so elaborate it took decades to unravel. When Bolshevik soldiers marched Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their 5 children into a basement in Yekaterinburg, they weren't just executing a royal family. They were attempting to erase an entire bloodline from history. Yet what happened next wasn't a clean execution, it was a botched, brutal massacre that left the killers scrambling to conceal their crimes. Eyewitness accounts describe chaos. The execution squad, drunk and nervous, opened fire with revolvers and bayonets in a cramped room. Bullets ricocheted off the walls as the Romanov daughters, rumored to have jewels sewn into their corsets, initially survived the barrage. It took over 20 minutes to confirm every death. Then came the cover-up. The bodies were stripped, mutilated with acid, and dumped into a mine shaft, only to be hastily retrieved when rumors spread of the burial site. The killers then burned 2 corpses, likely Alexei and 1 daughter, in a forest clearing while burying the rest in an unmarked grave. For days, Soviet officials lied. They announced Nicholas's execution but claimed his family had been relocated to safety, a story that crumbled when White Army forces captured Yekaterinburg weeks later and found the blood-stained basement. But the most audacious deception was still to come. In 1922, a woman named Anna Anderson surfaced in Berlin claiming to be Anastasia. Her detailed knowledge of royal life convinced many, including some Romanov relatives. For decades, her case became a global sensation, until DNA testing in the 1990s proved she was an imposter, a Polish factory worker with a history of mental illness. The truth finally emerged in 1991 when amateur sleuths discovered the main Romanov grave. Forensic analysis matched the bones to Nicholas, Alexandra, and 3 daughters, but 2 were still missing. It took another 16 years to find the second burial site, where DNA confirmed the remains of Alexei and the 4th daughter. The science left no doubt every Romanov had died that night. But here's the chilling part. Soviet records reveal orders from Lenin himself to leave no traces. They nearly succeeded. Had those graves stayed hidden, the world might still believe the Bolsheviks' lies, proof that sometimes history's darkest secrets only come to light by accident. The Romanovs' tragedy wasn't just their deaths, it was how close they came to being erased from memory altogether. Queen Christina of Sweden's abdication in 1654 wasn't just a political earthquake, it was a cultural detonation. At 27, the brilliant, cigar-smoking monarch shocked Europe by surrendering her crown, converting to Catholicism, and fleeing to Rome. But beneath the surface, this wasn't merely a crisis of faith. It was a rebellion against the very foundations of the society that raised her, a collision of religion, gender, and identity so explosive, its echoes still baffle historians today. The official story was simple. Christina, raised Protestant in a kingdom that had fought bloody wars against Catholic powers, claimed she could no longer reconcile her beliefs with Sweden's Lutheran state religion. But Vatican archives reveal deeper tensions. Her letters to the Pope crackle with intellectual restlessness, railing against the chains of monarchy and the theater of court life. She despised the expectation to marry and produce an heir, once quipping she'd rather carry buckets of stones than endure a wedding. When advisors pressed the issue, she staged elaborate delays, feigning illness, demanding absurd prenuptial terms, even inviting suitors to freezing midnight debates about philosophy, knowing they'd flee. Then there's the matter of her closest confidants. Christina surrounded herself with women who defied convention, like the outspoken Countess Ebba Spar, whom she called her bed friend in letters dripping with intimacy. They exchanged rings, shared private chambers, and wrote passionately of their bond, fueling speculation that Christina's abdication was as much about escaping heteronormative expectations as religious ones. Contemporary critics labeled her a monster for wearing men's shoes and cropped hair, while modern scholars pore over her coded diaries, finding references to the love that dare not speak its name centuries before the phrase was coined. The aftermath only deepens the mystery. In Rome, Christina became a patron of artists and scientists, hosting salons where she debated Galileo's theories, all while living as a celibate Catholic convert. Or did she? Recent discoveries in the Vatican's secret archives suggest she may have secretly married her longtime lady-in-waiting, though the documents were hastily corrected by church officials. Whether her conversion was spiritual liberation or strategic camouflage remains hotly debated. One thing's certain, in an era where queens were expected to be wives, mothers, and martyrs to duty, Christina chose a crownless existence and in doing so became one of history's most enigmatic rulers. Not a woman who fit inside the boxes of her time, but one who burned them down and walked away. For 3 decades, a nameless prisoner languished in the darkest cells of France, his face forever concealed by a mask of black velvet. Not just any mask, but one reportedly reinforced with iron bars, a grotesque contraption designed to erase his identity completely. Louis XIV, the Sun King, didn't just want this man imprisoned. He wanted him forgotten, but history has a way of resurrecting its ghosts, and the mystery of the man in the iron mask has taunted scholars for centuries. Was he a disgraced noble, a fallen general, or something far more dangerous, a secret twin to the king himself, hidden away to prevent a challenge to the throne? The first clue lies in the prisoner's bizarre treatment. Unlike common criminals, he was housed in relative comfort with fine meals and even a harpsichord in his cell at Pignerol Fortress. Guards were ordered to kill him if he ever removed his mask, yet they addressed him as Monsieur, a title reserved for nobility. Most chillingly, when transferred to the Bastille in 1698, he traveled in a covered litter, his face shielded even from the soldiers escorting him. This wasn't just punishment, it was theater, a performance meant to broadcast absolute royal power. Voltaire later stoked the fires of speculation, claiming the prisoner was Louis's older illegitimate brother, hidden because his existence threatened the king's divine right to rule. Then came Alexander Dumas, whose novel spun a tale of swapped twins, one destined for the throne, the other for a life of enforced obscurity. But modern historians point to a more plausible candidate, Eustache Dodger, a valet entangled in a scandal involving Nicolas Fouquet, Louis's disgraced finance minister. Dodger allegedly knew secrets about Fouquet's alleged treason, secrets so explosive they warranted a lifetime of silence, yet the dungeon walls whisper another possibility. Louis XIV's reign was riddled with paranoia plots, poisonings, and power struggles that made even the king's inner circle unsafe. What if the mask wasn't just to hide the prisoner's face, but to protect the kingdom from the truth he carried? The Bastille's records were deliberately destroyed during the French Revolution, ensuring the man's identity would die with him, but perhaps that's the point. The greatest power move isn't just locking away your enemies, it's making sure no one remembers why they were there in the first place. Mary, Queen of Scots, didn't just write letters, she weaponized them. In the damp gloom of Fotheringhay Castle, where she spent her final years as Elizabeth I's prisoner, Mary's words became her last hope of survival. But these weren't ordinary pleas for mercy. They were masterpieces of cryptography, penned in a complex cipher only her allies could decode, each one a desperate gamble to outmaneuver the spies watching her every move. What Elizabeth's jailers didn't know, the broken wax seals on intercepted envelopes weren't accidents. They were breadcrumbs in a high-stakes game of treason and betrayal. The cipher system itself was fiendishly clever. Mary and her co-conspirators used a mixture of symbols, coded names, and even musical notation to cloak their messages. A simple flower doodle might represent a potential ally, while crossed keys signaled urgent danger. Her most infamous letters, the Babington Plot correspondence, were so meticulously encrypted that Elizabeth's spymaster, Sir Francis Walsingham, had to employ a double agent just to crack them. For months, Mary believed she was organizing a Catholic uprising to free her. In reality, every word she wrote was being copied, decoded, and stacked as evidence against her. Then there are the wax seals. Forensic analysis of surviving letters reveals tiny tears where Elizabeth's agents pried them open, then clumsily resealed them with fresh wax. But Mary anticipated this. Some letters contained hidden warnings only visible if the seal was broken, a subtle smear of ink or a misplaced thread meant to alert her that the message had been compromised. It almost worked. When Walsingham finally presented the decoded letters at Mary's trial, she coolly dismissed them as forgeries, pointing to these very flaws as proof of tampering. The most chilling detail, though, lies in the paper itself. Recent spectral imaging has uncovered layers of previous drafts beneath Mary's final letters, showing how carefully she edited each line to appear loyal while secretly plotting. One phrase, scratched out but still visible under ultraviolet light, reads, "The Scots Queen will rise again," a defiant whisper beneath the diplomatic niceties. It's a haunting glimpse into the mind of a woman who knew her words might be her last. In the end, the cipher that was meant to save her became the noose around her neck. Walsingham's decrypted letters proved decisive in convincing Elizabeth to sign Mary's death warrant. Yet even at the scaffold, Mary fought with symbols. She wore crimson, the color of Catholic martyrdom, and clutched a crucifix, turning her execution into a coded message of its own. The tragedy of Mary's cipher letters isn't just that they failed. It's that they reveal how desperately brilliance could flare in the darkness of a prison cell, only to be snuffed out by the cold machinery of power. Centuries later, those broken seals and half-erased words still whisper of a queen who refused to surrender, even when the code was already cracked. Gaze at any portrait of Spain's King Charles II, and one feature dominates the canvas: his jaw. Protruding, misshapen, so pronounced he could barely chew his own food. This wasn't just a quirk of genetics, it was the unmistakable mark of a dynasty that had turned marriage into a weapon, trading spouses like chess pieces until the board collapsed under the weight of its own strategy. The Habsburgs didn't just rule Europe, they married into nearly every royal house on the continent, but their obsession with keeping power in the family came at a horrific cost, a genetic time bomb known as the Habsburg jaw. Scientific analysis of their lineage reads like a cautionary tale. Over 2 centuries, the Spanish Habsburgs practiced such extreme inbreeding that by Charles II's birth in 1661, his family tree was more of a wreath, with ancestors intermarrying so frequently, his inbreeding coefficient was higher than if he'd been born to siblings. Portraits don't just show the jaw, they reveal the cascading consequences. Charles's tongue was so enlarged he drooled uncontrollably. His legs couldn't support his weight. He suffered epileptic fits and didn't speak until age 4. Yet this broken man was heir to an empire spanning continents. The biological toll went far beyond aesthetics. Fertility rates plummeted with each generation. Charles's father, Philip IV, had 30 children, but only 7 survived infancy. By Charles's reign, the Spanish Habsburgs were functionally sterile. His 2 marriages produced no heirs despite frantic efforts, including pilgrimages to monasteries and consuming dubious fertility tonics. Modern geneticists point to multiple recessive disorders like combined pituitary hormone deficiency, which stunted growth and crippled immune systems. But the Habsburgs didn't need science to see the warning signs. A courtier's diary describes young Charles as so weak he seems to melt before one's eyes, while foreign ambassadors wrote home that Spain was now ruled by a living corpse. What makes this tragedy so chilling isn't just the physical decay, it's the deliberate denial. Royal matchmakers knew the risks. After Charles I married his first cousin, their son Philip III suffered such severe rickets he needed help mounting his horse. Yet the family doubled down, believing divine right would override biology. When Charles II finally died childless in 1700, the autopsy noted his body contained not a single drop of blood, likely the result of generations of hemophilia. His heart, they wrote, was the size of a peppercorn, a fitting epitaph for a dynasty that shrank its own future to preserve the purity of its past. The Habsburg jaw wasn't just a deformity, it was the visible price of power when bloodline matters more than survival. And in the end, the very thing they sought to protect became the flaw that erased them from history. Edward VIII's reign lasted just 326 days, the shortest in modern British history. Officially, he abdicated for love, giving up the throne to marry Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American. But declassified documents reveal a far darker narrative. A king whose cozy ties to Nazi Germany nearly dragged Britain into one of history's most catastrophic diplomatic scandals. While the world fixated on his romance, Edward was quietly courting Hitler, exchanging letters filled with admiration, and even sharing British military secrets with the enemy. This wasn't just a reckless flirtation with fascism, it was a betrayal that could have rewritten the outcome of World War II. The bombshell evidence lies in long-suppressed FBI files. Agents monitoring Nazi sympathizers in the 1930s intercepted communications between Edward, then still king, and top-ranking German officials. One memo details a secret 1937 meeting between the Duke of Windsor, as he became after abdicating, and Hitler at the Führer's Berghof retreat. Home movie footage recently unearthed from Windsor Castle's archives shows Edward raising a glass with Hitler in a toast, grinning as the dictator praises his understanding of Germany's rightful place in Europe. Even more damning, diplomatic cables proving Edward urged the British government to surrender to Hitler in 1940, calling resistance folly during the Blitz. Why would a British king side with the enemy? The answer lies in his inner circle. Edward surrounded himself with aristocratic fascists like Baron Eugene de Rothschild, who funded Nazi propaganda campaigns. Wallis Simpson's own letters, seized by MI5, referenced her and Edward's belief that Hitler was the only man who can save Europe from Bolshevism. But the real smoking gun came from German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop's diaries, which describe Edward as our best hope for a puppet ruler in London once Germany invaded. Churchill, fearing a coup, exiled Edward to the Bahamas as governor, a humiliating demotion disguised as a diplomatic post. The abdication itself now reads like a carefully staged distraction. While the press obsessed over Wallis's marital status, Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin and Churchill knew the truth. Edward's pro-Nazi leanings made him unfit to reign. Forced to choose between crown and conspiracy, he stepped down, but not before attempting to broker a back-channel peace deal with Germany through his contacts. Historians now believe Baldwin accelerated the abdication to prevent Edward from exploiting his royal status to undermine British war efforts, the most chilling detail. Edward wasn't alone. His brother George VI's coronation guest list included several known fascist sympathizers, suggesting the rot went deeper than one rogue king. When the war ended, British intelligence scrubbed Edward's files so thoroughly that key documents only resurfaced in the 1990s. The man who claimed he gave up the throne for love may have actually been pushed because his loyalties lay with the very regime Britain was fighting to destroy. And had his plans succeeded, the world might remember not just an abdication but a king who nearly handed victory to Hitler. Cleopatra's legend is steeped in venom, both the literal kind that ended her life and the political poisons she wielded with chilling precision. But one of history's most spine-tingling tales isn't about her death. It's about how she allegedly used condemned prisoners as human test subjects to perfect her arsenal of toxins. Ancient historians like Plutarch describe a queen who turned her palace dungeons into a macabre laboratory, where the line between royal science and ruthless cruelty blurred beyond recognition. According to surviving accounts, Cleopatra orchestrated gruesome trials to determine the most painless poison for her own eventual suicide. Prisoners were force-fed or injected with various substances while physicians monitored their reactions, how quickly paralysis set in, whether convulsions occurred, even the aesthetics of their final expressions. The goal, to find a death that was swift, dignified, and left the body intact for a regal funeral. Plutarch claims she settled on the Egyptian asp not just for its symbolic ties to the goddess Isis, but because its venom induced drowsiness rather than agonized thrashing. But here's where the story twists. Modern toxicologists have dissected these ancient reports and found startling inconsistencies. Asp venom, while deadly, causes excruciating muscle spasms and swelling, hardly the serene departure described. Some scholars now suggest Cleopatra's experiments were psychological warfare, staged to terrify political rivals into believing she controlled the very essence of death. The infamous scene of her applying a hairpin to a prisoner's arm, possibly theater, designed to showcase her fearlessness. Then there's the striking detail of her personal physician Olympus, who Plutarch says assisted in these trials before later aiding her suicide. Was he a willing accomplice or a coerced pawn? Papyrus fragments discovered in Alexandria hint that Olympus might have falsified records to protect her legacy, describing certain poisons as gentle when they were anything but. The ultimate irony, Cleopatra's meticulous planning may have been for nothing. When Roman forces closed in, her actual death, whether by asp, poisoned comb, or smuggled vial, was messy enough that Augustus's propagandists painted it as cowardly. The Queen, who spent years calibrating the perfect exit, still couldn't control how history remembered it. Her poison trials weren't just about finding an escape. They were a desperate bid to choreograph the one moment even a ruler couldn't fully command. And in that struggle, she proved no one, not even a pharaoh, holds power over the final curtain. Marie Antoinette never laid eyes on that diamond necklace, yet its sparkle nearly burned down the French monarchy. The scandal that erupted in 1785 wasn't just about stolen jewels. It was a masterclass in deception where a con artist, a forged signature, and public fury collided to seal a queen's fate long before the guillotine fell. At the center stood Jeanne de Valois, a Chinese letter Countes with a genius for manipulation and a grudge against the crown. Her scheme was audacious: to trick a wealthy cardinal into buying a necklace worth nearly £2,000 of gold, equivalent to France's entire naval budget, by convincing him Marie Antoinette secretly desired it. Jeanne's brilliance lay in exploiting existing rumors. The Queen's reputation had already soured over extravagant spending, earning her the nickname Madame Deficit. So when Jeanne produced letters supposedly from Marie Antoinette begging Cardinal de Rohan to broker the necklace purchase in secret, the cardinal leaped at the chance to regain royal favor. The forged correspondence dripped with intimate details, all lifted from court gossip Jeanne had collected. She even hired a prostitute to impersonate the Queen in a midnight garden rendezvous, her face veiled by the shadows Versailles was so fond of. But the necklace itself became the scheme's undoing. Crafted for Louis XV's mistress, the piece boasted 647 diamonds arranged in cascading tiers, so massive it required a custom velvet case. When jewelers demanded payment, the cardinal's confusion unraveled the plot. At trial, the public learned jaw-dropping details. Jeanne had dismantled the necklace, selling gems piecemeal to fund her lavish lifestyle, while letters revealed her mocking the cardinal as a fool who bought bridges in the sky. The verdict: Jeanne was branded and imprisoned, but the damage to Marie Antoinette was irreversible. Pamphlets circulated depicting the Queen laughing as peasants starved, their pages adorned with crude sketches of the necklace. Revolutionary orators later cited the affair as proof of royal corruption, even though the Queen had been innocent all along. The real crime wasn't theft, it was how easily a clever fraudster could weaponize public distrust. By the time the Bastille fell, that necklace had become more than jewelry. It was a noose woven from diamonds, tightening around a monarchy that never saw the trap coming. And in the end, the only thing stolen was the truth. Under the streets of Moscow, hidden beneath centuries of rubble and legend, lies what could be history's greatest literary treasure, if it exists at all. Ivan the Terrible's lost library, a rumored trove of ancient manuscripts, has taunted archaeologists and treasure hunters for generations. Some say it holds priceless Byzantine texts, others whisper of heretical scrolls banned by the church. But the only thing more intriguing than the library's contents is the chilling story of how it vanished and the twisted clues Ivan left behind. The obsession began with Ivan himself. A Tsar who could recite scripture from memory yet ordered the torture of thousands, he was a walking contradiction, a scholar who reveled in brutality. Contemporary accounts describe him inheriting a vast collection from his grandmother Sophia Paleologue, a Byzantine princess who brought rare Greek and Latin texts to Moscow. Diplomatic letters from the time mention a great underground chamber where Ivan stored his books safe from fire and thieves. Then, after his death in 1584, the trail goes cold. The library simply disappears from records as if swallowed by the earth. Enter the modern hunters. In 1997, a team of engineers scanning beneath the Kremlin for secret tunnels stumbled upon an anomaly, a hollow space large enough to be a room, its walls lined with metal. Could this be Ivan's vault? The Kremlin blocked further investigation, citing structural risks. Then came the maps. A handwritten note from the 1800s surfaced in Estonia, claiming to detail the library's location beneath the Arbat district. Excavations there revealed nothing but a network of collapsed tunnels, their ceilings studded with iron hooks perfect for hanging lamps to read by, or so the hopeful speculated. But here's where the mystery deepens. In 2015, historians cross-referenced Ivan's personal letters with medieval land deeds. They found a startling pattern. Every site linked to the library's possible locations was also a known execution ground. Was this coincidence or the Tsar's idea of a sick joke? Some believe Ivan, ever the sadist, deliberately built his treasure trove beneath places of torment, ensuring even the search for knowledge would be drenched in blood. The most tantalizing clue, though, comes from an unlikely source, a prisoner. During Stalin's purges, an arrested archaeologist reportedly confessed to finding the library in the 1930s, only for the NKVD to seal the entrance and vanish him. His sketch of a hidden chamber smuggled out by his daughter shows shelves carved from stone, their contents reduced to dust. Whether truth or desperate fiction, it's a haunting reminder of how power and knowledge intertwine in Russia's shadowy past. After 5 centuries of false leads and dead ends, the library's fate remains one of 2 possibilities. Either it's rotting in some flooded tunnel, its parchment dissolving into mud, or it's exactly where Ivan wanted it, forever just out of reach, a ghost whispering to those who dare dig too deep. Either way, the real treasure isn't the books. It's the lesson they carry. Some secrets aren't meant to be found, only feared. And in that, Ivan the Terrible got his final, terrible wish. Empress Wu Zetian didn't just climb the ladder of power, she shattered it, then rebuilt it in her own image. From humble concubine to the only woman ever to rule China as emperor in name as well as deed, her ascent was a masterclass in ambition, seduction, and ruthless calculation. But what makes her story truly chilling isn't just the title she claimed, it's the bodies she left in her wake. Behind the silk curtains of the Tang dynasty's golden age, whispers of poisoned teacups, smothered infants, and conveniently timed accidents swirled like incense smoke around her throne. Take the case of Empress Wang, the first obstacle in Wu's path. Historical records describe her as kind but barren, a fatal flaw in a court obsessed with heirs. Wu, already a favored concubine, bore Emperor Gaozong a son, then allegedly staged her own daughter's murder to frame Wang. The Tang Shu, an official dynasty history, claims Wu strangled the infant herself before summoning the emperor, collapsing in tears beside the crib. When Gaozong found the child dead with Wang present moments earlier, the trap snapped shut. Wang was demoted, then imprisoned in a remote palace where, coincidentally, her limbs were later found crushed, likely from torture. Wu's fingerprints weren't on the instruments, but the message was clear: cross her, and even royal blood wouldn't save you. Then there's the matter of the tea. Court physicians' notes from the era document Gaozong's worsening headaches and blindness symptoms consistent with slow arsenic poisoning. Wu, now empress consort, personally prepared his daily tonics. Paintings from the period show her pouring liquid from an ornate ewer while attendants avert their eyes, the brushstrokes lingering on her inscrutable smile. By the time Gaozong died in 683, Wu had already eliminated rival princes, exiled dissenting ministers, and placed her supporters in key military posts. When her sons proved too independent-minded to rule as puppets, she deposed them, one under house arrest, the other dead within a year of resisting her. But Wu's true genius lay in weaponizing symbolism. She commissioned Buddhist art portraying herself as a reincarnation of the future Buddha Maitreya, her likeness merging with divine figures in temple murals. Propaganda poems declared her reign ordained by heaven, while secret police stifled dissent with a network of informers. Even nature was coerced into her narrative. When a river miraculously changed course to avoid damaging a statue of her, court scholars declared it proof of her mandate of heaven. The most damning evidence of her calculated brutality, however, lies in the Lingyan Gallery, Among portraits of Tang loyalists, one frame sits conspicuously empty, that of Chancellor Chu Suliang, who opposed her rise. After his exile, Wu ordered his image scraped from history, the plaster beneath still scarred by the violence of its removal. It's a fitting metaphor for her rule. Those who stood against her weren't just defeated, they were erased. By the time she declared herself emperor in 690, founding her short-lived Zhou dynasty, the machinery of terror was so refined that few dared whisper dissent. Modern scholars still debate how much blame Wu deserves versus what was projected onto her by later Confucian historians eager to vilify a woman who dared seize the ultimate power. But one fact remains: in a system designed to keep women kneeling, Wu didn't just stand, she towered, reshaping an empire with one hand while the other held a dagger behind her back. And whether through poison, propaganda, or sheer force of will, she ensured history would remember one thing above all: she feared no one and nothing, not even the weight of a crown no woman was meant to wear. The hall was alive with music and laughter until the single drumbeat cut through the revelry like a blade. Edinburgh Castle, 1440, and the young Earl of Douglas had every reason to trust King James II's hospitality. The 16-year-old noble and his 10-year-old brother were honored guests at a royal banquet, their clan's power making them natural allies. Then the servants slammed the doors shut. A black bull's head, symbol of death, was placed before them. In that heartbeat, the Douglas boys understood this wasn't a feast, it was an execution in disguise. The so-called Black Dinner wasn't just political murder, it was psychological warfare perfected. James, barely 12 himself, watched silently as his regent, Sir William Crichton, ordered the brothers dragged outside. Contemporary chronicles describe how the boys clung to each other, pleading for mercy as the headsman's axe glinted in the torchlight, their crime simply being the last Douglases. Their family's influence had grown too vast, their castles too numerous. By erasing the bloodline in one stroke, the crown reclaimed control, but at what cost? The parallels to Game of Thrones' Red Wedding are no coincidence. George R.R. Martin has openly cited the Black Dinner as inspiration for his infamous massacre. Both events weaponized hospitality's sacred laws, transforming bread and salt into tokens of betrayal. But where fiction amplified the bloodshed for shock value, history's version is arguably more chilling in its bureaucratic coldness. No frenzied stabbings or crossbow volleys, just a calculated legal murder. Crichton even staged a mock trial afterward, producing evidence of Douglas' treachery salvaged from burned documents. Yet the aftermath reveals the real horror. James, traumatized by his complicity, reportedly developed a lifelong aversion to violence despite his nickname, James of the Fiery Face. Decades later, he died accidentally blown apart by one of his own siege cannons during a rebellion. Poetic justice, perhaps, but the Douglas bloodline had the last laugh. A distant cousin survived the purge, and within generations the family regained prominence. Their motto, "Forward," a defiant rebuttal to the crown's belief that terror could erase ambition. The Black Dinner's legacy isn't just in its brutality, it's in the blueprint it offered future tyrants. From the massacre of Glencoe to Stalin's purges, the lesson echoed: invite your enemies to table, and the meal costs nothing but their lives. But here's the twist modern historians uncover in tax records: the banquet's menu was shockingly modest. No roasted peacocks or spiced wines, just mutton, bread, and sour ale. A grim reminder that betrayal, at its core, is a cheap and thrifty thing. And in Scotland's misty highlands, where castles still bear Douglas crests, the shadows of two boys remind us that broken trust stains deeper than blood. The Spanish royal family had a secret so explosive they rewrote history to bury it. When Prince Alfonso of Asturias, heir to the throne, was diagnosed with hemophilia in 1907, the palace didn't just downplay the illness. They fabricated an elaborate web of lies that turned every bruise into a riding accident, every hospitalization into a vague childhood ailment. But behind closed doors, telegrams between doctors reveal the truth. Spain's future king was a ticking time bomb, his veins coursing with a genetic curse that had already toppled empires. Portraits tell the first layer of deception. Official paintings show a robust young prince in military uniform, his posture straight, his skin unblemished. But hidden beneath the gilt frames are the original sketches, outtakes where artists were instructed to airbrush out the telltale swelling around his joints. One previously unpublished watercolor, discovered in a Madrid attic in 2019, shows Alfonso's left knee twice its normal size, the skin mottled purple. The final version, flawless, then came the medical cover-up. When 7-year-old Alfonso gashed his forehead during a palace playdate, court bulletins claimed he'd tumbled from a pony. In reality, the cut, which should have required 2 stitches, bled for 3 days, requiring transfusions from 4 donors. Doctors' notes describe frantic efforts to hide the evidence. Carpets replaced when a single drop stained the wool. Servants sworn to secrecy with bonuses equal to a year's wages. The most damning record is a 1912 X-ray slip from a German clinic, where physicians listed his condition plainly as hemophilia, until a Spanish diplomat had the diagnosis manually scratched out and replaced with bone fragility. The parallels to Russia's doomed Alexei Romanov were too stark to ignore. Spain's royals knew how hemophilia had destabilized the Romanovs, making Tsar Nicholas vulnerable to Rasputin's influence. So they borrowed a page from British royalty's playbook. Queen Victoria's descendants had quietly managed the disease by controlling information. But Alfonso XIII took it further, commissioning fake newsreels of his son playing sports and even staging a bizarre photo op where the prince accidentally nicked his finger with a sword, then laughed as a servant bandaged it. The message: see how quickly our blood clots. What makes this conspiracy uniquely chilling is how it unraveled. In 1938, after the monarchy fell, exiled courtiers auctioned off private letters to survive. One batch contained a physician's chilling forecast. Given the prince's condition, he would not survive a major injury past 20. Alfonso of Asturias died at 31 in a Miami car crash, a minor collision for most but fatal for him. The coroner's report, buried for decades, noted his body was a roadmap of old hemorrhages, organs dotted with the scars of 1,000 tiny internal bleeds. The greatest tragedy isn't that Spain lost a prince to hemophilia, it's that they sacrificed truth for stability, only to collapse into civil war anyway. Those airbrushed portraits now hang in museums, their lies frozen in oil and varnish. But if you look closely at the prince's eyes, always slightly too solemn for a child, you'll see the real cost of royal secrets. Not deception, but loneliness, the isolation of being the one person in a gilded palace who isn't allowed to admit he's in pain. High above the glittering chaos of Constantinople, within the walls of Topkapi Palace, lay a gilded nightmare, the caves or cages, where Ottoman princes were kept like exotic birds with clipped wings. These weren't ordinary prison cells, adorned with intricate mosaics and lush silk cushions. They were luxury prisons designed to break spirits without leaving visible scars. Behind the lattice screens, heirs to the empire spent years, sometimes decades, cut off from the world, their only crime being born into a family where power was a game of last man standing. The cave system was born from one of history's most ruthless laws, Maimed II's fratricide decree, which bluntly stated, "For the order of the world, the Sultan may execute his brothers." The logic was coldly efficient: eliminate potential rivals before they could spark civil war. But as the empire matured, so did its cruelty. By the 1600s, outright murder gave way to psychological torment. New sultans, fearing rebellion, kept their brothers alive but imprisoned, ensuring no rival could gather support while slowly driving them mad with isolation. Surviving letters from the caves paint a haunting picture. One prince, confined for 19 years, wrote of forgetting the sound of his own voice. Another described counting the tiles on his ceiling over 10,000 times. The most tragic cases were the shadow sultans, princes like Mustafa I, who emerged from decades of confinement to rule, only to be swiftly deposed when his erratic behavior, shaped by years of sensory deprivation, proved too unstable for the throne. Yet the caliphs wasn't just about control, it was a twisted form of theater. Visitors to Topkapi would catch glimpses of the caged princes during ceremonies, a living reminder of the sultan's absolute power. The message was clear: even those of royal blood could be reduced to specters if they challenged the order. Some sultans added macabre flourishes, like Murad IV, who forced his imprisoned brothers to listen to the screams of executed officials through their barred windows. Modern archaeologists examining the caliph's chambers found eerie evidence of these silent wars. Scratches on walls formed chessboards, likely carved with stolen utensils. Hidden compartments held smuggled books, their pages worn thin from rereading. The most poignant discovery, a child's wooden horse carved by a prince who entered the caves at age 8 and died there 60 years later, never having touched grass. What makes the caves uniquely horrifying isn't just the physical confinement, it's how the Ottomans weaponized time itself. Unlike the swift blade of a fratricide, the cages stretched suffering across lifetimes, turning potential rivals into hollowed-out shells. By the empire's twilight, the system backfired spectacularly. Sultans raised in the caves, like Ibrahim the Mad, were so traumatized by isolation that they unleashed erratic purges, hastening the empire's decline. The very institution created to preserve power became its gravedigger, proof that even the cruelest machines of control can turn against their makers. And in the quiet of Topkapi's abandoned cages, you can still hear the echoes of princes who learned too late that golden bars cut deeper than steel. Princess Caraboo arrived in England like a character torn from the pages of a Gothic novel, barefoot, draped in exotic fabrics and speaking a language no scholar could decipher. The year was 1817, and the coastal village of Almondsbury buzzed with excitement over this mysterious woman who claimed to be royalty from a distant island called Javasu. The local magistrate's wife, intrigued by her regal bearing, took her in, launching one of the most audacious social hoaxes of the 19th century. What followed wasn't just deception, it was a masterclass in how easily the British elite could be seduced by the allure of the exotic, especially when it wore a pretty face. Caraboo's act was meticulous. She refused English food, insisting on eating only pineapple and praying to an invisible god she called Allah Ta'ala. She danced with hypnotic grace, wielding a bow and arrow with uncanny skill, and even carved strange symbols into trees, a script later revealed to be a mix of Romani, Greek, and pure invention. Newspapers ate it up, printing breathless accounts of the wild princess, while linguists and anthropologists tripped over themselves to authenticate her story. The craze reached such heights that a certain Lady Raffles, wife of the famed British governor of Java, invited Caraboo to her estate, convinced she'd encountered a fellow colonial rarity. The cracks began with a single slip. A Portuguese sailor recognized her from a Bristol workhouse where she'd been known as Mary Baker, a cobbler's daughter from Devonshire. Confronted, Caraboo, now Mary, spun yet another tale, claiming she'd been kidnapped by pirates before escaping to Javasu. But the truth was far simpler. She'd pieced together her persona from newspaper clippings about foreign lands, borrowing phrases from sailors' slang and travelers' journals. The real magic wasn't in her acting, it was in her audience's desperation to believe. What makes this hoax so revealing is what it exposed about Regency England. The aristocracy, weary of post-Napoleonic monotony, clung to Caraboo as proof that romance and mystery still existed beyond their manicured gardens. Even after her exposure, some refused to accept the truth, insisting she must have some royal blood. The press, initially humiliated, turned her into a folk anti-heroine, celebrating her ingenuity in an era when women had few avenues for reinvention. Caraboo's final act was perhaps her boldest. Capitalizing on her infamy, she toured as a curiosity, selling portraits of herself in native costume. Later, she sailed to America, where she reportedly ran a quiet boarding house, a far cry from palace halls, yet no less a kingdom of her own making. In the end, her greatest trick wasn't fabricating a language or a lineage. It was proving that nobility, for all its pomp, could be conjured with nothing more than confidence, a few well-placed symbols, and the willing suspension of disbelief. And in that, she was every bit as royal as the peers she duped. The waters of Lake Starnberg were eerily still on the evening of June 13, 1886, too calm, witnesses would later say, for the violent struggle that supposedly claimed Bavaria's most enigmatic king. Ludwig II's body was found floating in waist-deep water, his coat weighted down with rocks, his watch stopped at 6:54 p.m. Officially, it was suicide by drowning. But the autopsy told a stranger story. No water in his lungs, his jacket sleeves neatly buttoned, as if he'd never raised his arms to fight for life. This wasn't just a royal death, it was a staged scene, one that ignited whispers of murder, cover-ups, and a king whose true crime wasn't madness, but love that dared not speak its name. Ludwig's final hours read like a Gothic tragedy. Days earlier, he'd been declared insane by a cabal of ministers who'd never examined him. Their evidence, a mix of hearsay about sleepless nights spent building fairy tale castles and bankrupting the treasury. The real reason for his deposition, his refusal to govern as a figurehead, and worse, his rumored affairs with male attendants. Personal diaries confiscated after his death detailed passionate letters to actor Joseph Kainz, addressed as "My dearest Joseph" and signed "Eternally yours." In an era when paragraph 175 of the German Criminal Code punished homosexuality with imprisonment, these were more than secrets, they were political dynamite. Then there's the lake itself. Fishermen reported seeing two rowboats that evening, Ludwig's and a second, shadowy vessel that vanished before dawn. The king's companion, psychiatrist Bernhard von Gudden, also drowned, his body bearing bruises inconsistent with drowning. Conspiracy theories erupted. Had Ludwig been drugged and tossed overboard? Were those rocks sewn into his coat to silence him permanently? Modern forensic analysis of his hair samples reveals traces of chloral hydrate, a sedative Gudden often prescribed. Coincidence or proof the suicide was anything but? The most haunting clue lies in Ludwig's final construction site, Neuschwanstein Castle. Weeks before his death, workers whispered that he'd ordered a secret chamber behind the throne room, its walls inscribed with a single phrase, "I will remain an eternal mystery to myself and others." Was this the confession of a man who knew his time was running out? Today, tourists flock to Neuschwanstein's glittering halls, unaware they're walking through a suicide note in stone. Bavaria's official portrait of Ludwig as a reclusive lunatic crumbles under scrutiny. His mad spending on palaces now fuels a tourism industry worth billions. His refusal to marry looks less like instability and more like defiance in an era that gave queer men two choices, the closet or the grave. Even the lake keeps its secrets. Divers in 1986 found Ludwig's death site suspiciously cleared of debris, as if someone had tidied up the evidence. The king who built castles in the clouds may have met his end in shallow water, but the truth, that's buried deep in archives still locked, and in the unquiet ripples of a lake that never gives up its dead. The Vatican's vaults hold many treasures, but few are as chilling as an unassuming gold ring, its hollow cavity designed to conceal a single drop of liquid death. This was the alleged weapon of choice for Rodrigo Borgia, Pope Alexander VI, whose reign turned the papal court into a theater of terror. Contemporary accounts describe banquets where rival cardinals dropped dead mid-toast, their wine cups laced with La Cantarella, the Borgia's signature poison. But was this historical fact or anti-Spanish propaganda? Modern forensic analysis of Vatican artifacts and centuries-old gossip may finally separate truth from legend. Take the infamous Banquet of Chestnuts in 1501. Ambassadors' letters detail a night of debauchery where 50 courtesans crawled naked between tables, competing for prizes thrown by the Pope himself. By dawn, 2 guests were dead, the official cause indigestion. Yet Venetian spy reports note Alexander's enemies perished with identical symptoms, violent stomach cramps and blackened tongues, while his allies mysteriously avoided certain dishes. Chemical tests on unearthed Medici ceramics from that era reveal arsenic residue in decorative grape motifs, suggesting poison could be hidden in food's visual design. Then there's the ring itself, displayed in Rome's Criminology Museum. Its twisted mechanism works like a serpent's fang. Twist the bezel, and a tiny needle emerges to deliver toxin. Alexander reportedly tested his concoctions on prisoners, timing their agonies with an hourglass, a detail confirmed by jailer logs found in Castel Sant'Angelo's archives. But the real smoking gun comes from Lucrezia Borgia's personal poison garden, recently reconstructed by botanists. Its centerpiece, a rare strain of belladonna bred for potency, its berries 3 times deadlier than wild varieties. The Borgia's brilliance lay in weaponizing ritual. Cardinal Sforza's fatal gift of wine arrived in an ornate flask bearing his own crest, making refusal unthinkably rude. When victims inevitably collapsed, Alexander would theatrically call for doctors, feigning concern as his ring hand rested casually on their lips. Even their poisons were coded by class. Arsenic for nobles untraceable in Italy until the 19th century, strychnine for commoners whose convulsions sent visible warnings. Modern historians discovered the darkest twist in 2012 when Spanish archivists found Alexander's private confessor's notes. Buried beneath layers of censored Vatican correspondence was a scribbled Latin phrase, peccatum per venenum est absolutum, the sin of poison is absolved. It seems the Pope didn't just kill, he granted himself divine forgiveness in advance. The Borgias understood what few dared admit. In the game of power, even God's laws bend to those who know where to hide the bodies and the recipes. In the shadowed nursery of the Alexander Palace, where doctors whispered of hopeless cases and priests prepared last rites, a Siberian peasant performed what court physicians called miracles. Grigory Rasputin's hands, calloused from years of labor, hovered over Tsarevich Alexei's swollen joints, and somehow the bleeding stopped. This wasn't just faith healing. It was a macabre dance of desperation where science failed and superstition thrived, all set against the ticking clock of a dynasty's survival. The Romanovs' darkest secret wasn't Alexei's hemophilia, it was how deeply they relied on a man whose very presence became their greatest liability. The boy's medical records tell a chilling story. One entry from 1912 describes a groin hemorrhage so severe, the court tailor was summoned to sew extra padding into Alexei's trousers, not to hide the swelling, but to absorb the blood soaking through. When morphine failed, the desperate Tsarina Alexandra turned to Rasputin. Eyewitness accounts describe his rituals, candles flickering as he chanted psalms, his fingers pressing not on Alexei's skin, but just above it, as though smoothing invisible wounds. Then came the telegrams, cryptic notes like "the little one will not die today," arriving hours before doctors noted inexplicable improvements. Modern hematologists offer a plausible explanation. Rasputin likely forbade aspirin, then commonly prescribed for pain but now known to worsen bleeding. His hypnosis techniques may have lowered Alexei's blood pressure, while his insistence on rest prevented joint damage. But the deeper magic was psychological. Alexandra's diaries reveal how Rasputin reframed the disease. God marks special children with special trials, he whispered, transforming shame into twisted pride. Suddenly, the boy who couldn't play with other children was mythologized as a suffering saint, a narrative that bound the family tighter to their controversial mystic. The real scandal lies in the blood rituals. French tutor Pierre Gilliard's memoirs describe midnight sessions where Rasputin pricked his own finger, mixing his blood with Alexei's in a silver cup. Like brothers under the skin, He'd murmur a blasphemous echo of communion that horrified courtiers. Forensic analysis of letters between Rasputin and the Tsarina shows traces of hemoglobin, suggesting these rituals involved written oaths sealed in blood. The unspoken message was clear: only Rasputin's vitality could counteract the cursed Romanov bloodline. Yet Rasputin's greatest power came from what he destroyed: medical privacy. By turning Alexei's condition into a spiritual spectacle, he forced the imperial family to acknowledge their vulnerability. Every recovery amplified his influence, every relapse proved his indispensability. When generals begged Nicholas to send troops to World War I's front lines, Rasputin countered that without him, the heir would perish, holding the royal family hostage with the one thing they valued more than their empire: their son's fragile breath. The tragedy is twofold. Without Rasputin, Alexei might not have survived childhood. With him, the Romanovs became prisoners of their own dependence, blind to how their mystics' drunken orgies and political meddling fueled revolutionary anger. In the end, the mad monk didn't just treat the Tsarevich's bleeding. He became the hemorrhage the dynasty couldn't staunch, his presence seeping into every crack of their authority until the whole fragile edifice collapsed. The ultimate irony: the miracle worker who saved a boy's life couldn't save himself from the bullet that would echo through history. The waters of Lake Texcoco hold more than just centuries of silt. They conceal a treasure so vast, its loss still haunts historians and fortune hunters alike. When Hernan Cortés and his conquistadors fled Tenochtitlan on the Night of Sorrows in 1520, they didn't just leave behind dead comrades in the canals. Beneath the murky depths sank chests of gold, jade, and sacred Aztec codices, a king's ransom lost in the chaos of retreat. Modern estimates suggest the equivalent of billions in today's currency vanished that night, swallowed by the same waterways that once made the Aztec capital an island fortress. Cortés' own letters to King Charles V drip with barely concealed panic as he describes the disaster. Pack horses overloaded with plundered gold bars tumbled off makeshift bridges into the lake. Spanish soldiers, weighed down by armor and stolen treasure, drowned trying to swim to safety. But the real tragedy wasn't the bullion, it was the cultural annihilation. Among the sunken artifacts were illuminated codices detailing Aztec astronomy, medicine, and history, their fragile bark paper dissolving into sludge within decades. One surviving indigenous account, the Florentine Codex, laments how the water turned yellow with gold, yet none could retrieve it without angering the gods. Fast forward 5 centuries, and the hunt for Montezuma's treasure has taken a high-tech turn. In 2020, archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar beneath modern Mexico City's streets discovered anomalies matching the dimensions of 16th-century Spanish chests. Divers in the drained canals of the Xochimilco district now sift through sediment with vacuum probes, uncovering gold dust particles that trace a chemical fingerprint back to Aztec mines. The most tantalizing clue, a 1532 ship manifest listing 7 and 20 chests of painted books that never reached Seville, likely still resting where Cortés abandoned them. The real twist comes from Aztec prophecy. Priests had warned Montezuma that the gold would return to the water before the empire's fall, a prediction Cortés unwittingly fulfilled. Today, local fishermen tell of eerie lights flickering beneath the lake's surface on moonless nights, said to be the spirits of scribes guarding their drowned knowledge. Science offers a simpler explanation: methane gas from centuries of decay. But when a 2018 excavation uncovered a golden serpent headdress near the Templo Mayor, its emerald eyes still gleaming after 500 years submerged, even skeptics paused. If this was just one piece, what else lies buried in the toxic mud of a lake that refuses to give up its secrets? Perhaps the greatest irony is that Cortés' greed preserved what his culture sought to destroy. Had those codices reached Europe, they would have been burned as pagan heresy. Instead, the lake became a time capsule, safeguarding fragments of a civilization the Spanish thought they'd erased. Now, as engineers pump out groundwater and the ancient lakebed slowly reemerges, we may finally read the stories the water has kept silent all these centuries. Not just a tale of lost gold, but of a people who knew their history would one day resurface and made sure it waited for the right hands to uncover it. Queen Nzinga of Ndongo and Matamba didn't just fight colonial invaders, she outthought them at every turn. While Portuguese generals studied maps of Angola's terrain, Nzinga's spies were already inside their war rooms, whispering secrets into the night. This wasn't just resistance, it was psychological warfare, orchestrated by a queen who understood that battles could be won with stolen ink and wax seals as easily as with spears. The brilliance of Nzinga's network lay in its invisibility. Historical records from Portuguese officers complain of missing dispatches, altered orders, and scouts who vanished only to reappear fighting for the enemy. But the real gold mine, a surviving map from 1648, currently displayed in Lisbon's military archives. At first glance, it's a standard colonial survey until you notice the deliberate errors. Rivers drawn a mile east of their true courses, mountain passes labeled impassable that Nzinga's armies traversed with ease. This wasn't poor cartography. It was sabotage by Nzinga's most ingenious spies, the mapmakers themselves. Then there were the market women. Portuguese diaries describe female traders who brought yams and palm wine to garrisons, their baskets hiding encrypted notes written in Nsim by symbols scratched onto palm leaves that only Ndongo's elite could decipher. One particularly bold operative, known as Kifunji, posed as a convert to Christianity for over a decade, even serving as a cook in the governor's residence. Her greatest coup, switching the salt in Portuguese soldiers' rations with a powdered herb that induced drowsiness just before Nzinga's warriors attacked under cover of night. But Nzinga's masterstroke targeted the colonizers' greatest weakness, their reliance on African allies. She secretly bribed the Imbangola mercenaries the Portuguese employed, turning their infamous brutality against their paymasters. Battlefield dioramas in Luanda's Museum of Armed Forces tell the tale. One scene shows Portuguese troops advancing confidently, unaware that local guides leading them were Nzinga's agents, steering them into ambushes where quicks and swallowed cannon whole. The Queen's spies even weaponized religion. After nominally converting to Christianity to negotiate with the Vatican, Nzinga let slip to her confessor, actually a double agent, that she'd seen a vision of Saint Anthony condemning Portuguese rule. The story spread like wildfire through enslaved communities, sparking rebellions that tied up colonial forces. What makes Nzinga's spycraft legendary isn't just its scale, it's how she turned European biases against them. Portuguese commanders dismissed African women as non-threatening, never suspecting the grandmother selling spices might be memorizing their troop counts. Meanwhile, Nzinga herself played the exotic savage they expected, receiving diplomats while lounging on a throne made from conquered cannons, her attendants dressed in looted uniforms. The performance disarmed them literally. By the time they realized every gesture, every gift exchange was intelligence gathering, it was too late. Centuries before modern surveillance states, Nzinga proved the most dangerous weapon isn't steel, it's knowledge. And in the jungles of 17th century Angola, she schooled an empire in the art of seeing without being seen. Today, her tactics live on in Angola's military academies, where cadets still study how a queen with no satellites or wiretaps made an entire colonial apparatus dance to her hidden tune. The ultimate testament to her genius, the Portuguese never truly knew which of their own were working for her, and 500 years later, neither do we. Dublin Castle's heavily guarded Bedford Tower was supposed to be one of the most secure places in Ireland, until the morning of July 6, 1907, when guards arrived to find the jewel room's safe wide open, its velvet-lined drawers gutted like a fish. The Irish crown jewels, a dazzling set of diamond-studded insignia belonging to the Order of St. Patrick, had vanished without a single broken lock or disturbed cobweb. What made this heist truly shocking wasn't just the audacity of stealing royal regalia under the nose of British authorities. It was the growing certainty that the thief had to be someone the guards saluted every morning. The jewels themselves were more than just ceremonial bling. The centerpiece star and badge contained 394 gems, including Brazilian diamonds the size of thumbnail, arranged in a sunburst pattern so intricate it was said to blind viewers in candlelight. Their value, roughly 20 million in today's currency, but their symbolic worth was incalculable. These were the physical emblems of British rule over Ireland, worn by the Lord Lieutenant during royal ceremonies. Stealing them wasn't just theft, it was a slap to the Empire's face. Here's where the mystery twists. The safe's keys were kept in a locked drawer inside another office, a drawer only 7 high-ranking officials could access. Yet when detectives dusted the scene, they found no signs of forced entry, just a single whiskey glass left on a table, as if the thief had toasted their success. Suspicion immediately fell on the castle's own staff, particularly Arthur Vickers, the Ulster King of Arms. A flamboyant herald known for hosting raucous parties, Vickers had reportedly shown off the jewels to guests weeks before the theft, even letting a Dublin socialite try them on. His office was directly above the jewel room, connected by a poorly secured staircase. The investigation exploded into scandal when detectives uncovered a web of personal vendettas and cover-ups. Vickers' deputy, Francis Shackleton, brother of Antarctic explorer Ernest, was revealed to be deep in debt, with gambling receipts showing astronomical losses at Dublin's elite clubs. More damningly, Shackleton had mysteriously left Ireland days before the theft. Then came the whispers about coded messages found in Vickers' fireplace ashes, and rumors of a male brothel operating in the castle's basement where blackmail schemes could have flourished. But the real bombshell arrived when Scotland Yard's top investigator, Chief Inspector John Kane, abruptly closed the case after just 8 weeks, declaring it unsolvable. His confidential report, leaked decades later, pointed squarely at Shackleton but noted political pressure to avoid embarrassing the Crown. Vickers was fired in disgrace, while Shackleton, though publicly cleared, fled to Morocco, where he reinvented himself as an antiques dealer. The jewels, they never resurfaced despite persistent rumors of them being dismantled and sold piecemeal in Amsterdam's Diamond District. The most haunting detail lies in the empty display case itself. Modern forensic analysis shows faint scratch marks around the lock, not from picking tools but from a key inserted at the wrong angle. Someone had fumbled with the very keys they were entrusted to protect. Today, replicas gather dust in Dublin's Chester Beatty Library, a hollow reminder of a heist that exposed the rot beneath imperial pomp. The true theft wasn't just the missing diamonds, it was the way power, when challenged, would rather bury the truth than admit its own vulnerability. And in that sense, the Irish crown jewels didn't vanish, they were swallowed whole by the same system that claimed to own them. Archduke Franz Ferdinand's blood wasn't just royal, it was political dynamite. As heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, every heartbeat carried the weight of an empire. So when he fell desperately in love with a woman the Habsburg court deemed unworthy, it wasn't just a scandal, it was a constitutional crisis wrapped in velvet. Sophie Chotek, a Bohemian countess, had the right pedigree for a mistress but never a wife. The Habsburg family tree, a gnarled thicket of intermarriages stretching back centuries, had no room for a mere noblewoman, no matter how sharp her wit or steadfast her devotion. The emperor's ultimatum was brutal: abandon Sophie or sign away your children's futures. What Franz Ferdinand chose next would fracture the dynasty's foundations and set the stage for an assassination that would ignite a world war. The wedding itself was a masterpiece of imperial pettiness. Held in 1900 in Reichstadt's chapel, not a grand cathedral, Sophie entered through a side door while courtiers pointedly ignored her. Emperor Franz Joseph refused to attend, sending a single teacup as a gift. The real insult came in the oath Franz Ferdinand was forced to sign, known as the Renunciatory Act. This parchment, still preserved in Vienna's state archives, barred Sophie from sharing his rank, his carriage, even his opera box. Their children, though of royal blood, were stripped of succession rights, their names excluded from official genealogies. Yet the Archduke's defiance burned brighter than the emperor's disapproval. He commissioned a locket with Sophie's portrait, wearing it beneath his uniform where no courtier could see, until one fateful day in Sarajevo when assassins' bullets ripped through his jacket, revealing the hidden image to horrified onlookers. The tragedy lies in the timing. After 14 years of humiliation, Sophie was finally granted a sliver of recognition. 1914 was the year Emperor Franz Joseph permitted her to stand beside Franz Ferdinand at official events, starting with their tour of Bosnia. Film footage from June 28 shows the couple arriving in Sarajevo, Sophie in a white parasol hat, her husband rigid with nerves. For the first time in Habsburg history, a morganatic wife rode in an open carriage with a royal spouse. It was meant to be a triumph. Instead, Gavrilo Princip's bullets turned it into a double funeral. The dynasty that had shunned Sophie in life draped her casket in black alongside Franz Ferdinand's, the velvet cloak embroidered with the crest she'd been forbidden to wear. Modern historians now see their love story as a crack in the empire's facade. Franz Ferdinand's private letters, smuggled out of Vienna's Hofburg Palace after his death, reveal a man who loathed court pageantry and dreamed of reforming the monarchy into a federalist state. Some speculate his marriage was a quiet rebellion, proof that bloodlines mattered less than loyalty. Others argue Sophie's influence made him reckless, that his insistence on bringing her to Sarajevo despite assassination threats was a fatal miscalculation. Either way, their deaths didn't just start a war, they exposed the rot within a system so obsessed with purity, it would rather collapse than bend, the cruelest twist. Their 3 children, once erased from succession, became Habsburg's last hope after World War I dissolved the empire. In 1918, as revolutionaries stormed palaces, it was Sophie and Franz Ferdinand's son Maximilian who safeguarded the family's archives, hiding crown jewels in baby carriages. Today, their descendants quietly tend vineyards in Austria, their names stripped of titles but still carrying the blood of kings. The dynasty that rejected Sophie's lineage now survives through it, a bitter irony that would have made Franz Ferdinand smile. Their love wasn't just forbidden, it was prophetic, and on that sunlit Sarajevo street, the first shots of World War I didn't just kill an archduke, they buried the last chance for a monarchy that refused to change. From poisoned letters to stolen crowns, every one of these royal secrets did more than just shock the courts of their time. They cracked the foundations of entire dynasties. Imagine the ripple effects: a king's hidden illness that left a throne vulnerable, a queen's forged letters that turned public opinion into a weapon, or a heir's disappearance that fueled rebellions for generations. These weren't just scandals, they were pressure points exposing how fragile power really is when the truth slips through the gilded cracks. Now think about the world today. What lies are buried in sealed government files or whispered in corporate boardrooms? How many modern empires, political, financial, even digital, are just one leaked secret away from unraveling? The tactics haven't changed, only the players have. Spin doctors replace court jesters, hackers stand in for palace spies, and a single viral tweet can topple reputations faster than any executioner's axe. The lesson history screams at us isn't just about the past, it's a warning. Power thrives in shadows, but it's always one slip, one betrayal, one moment of honesty from collapsing under its own weight. So what's your take? Which of these royal secrets shocked you the most, and where do you see their echoes in today's world? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. And if you're hooked on these stories of buried truths and shattered crowns, don't forget to like and subscribe, because trust me, this is just the beginning. History's vaults are still packed with secrets waiting to be cracked open, and I'll be right here digging them up for you. Until next time, keep questioning the stories you're told. After all, the most dangerous lies are the ones everyone accepts without a second glance.